Hi, everyone. Welcome to One Book, One New Orleans Facebook page and YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. For those of you who might be new, what is One Book, One New Orleans? I'm so glad you asked. One Book, One New Orleans selects one book every year, and we encourage everyone in the city to read the same book at the same time, with the idea that we'll grow stronger as a community through a shared reading experience. But when we do that, we have to recognize that many in our community face barriers when it comes to accessing books. So we do the work to remove those barriers as best we can. We develop a curriculum around the book, and we get the book into the hands of adult learners in adult education programs, adult ESL programs, adult programs that are preparing adults for the high set. We also get it into both adult and juvenile prisons. We get the book into the ears of the listeners at WRBH Reading Radio for the Blind. And last but not least, we make sure that every branch of the New Orleans Public Library has a copy so that if you can't access the book because you can't afford to go buy it, we know it's available at your local library for free. And then to bring all of these readers from all these different walks of life together, we have a series of free family-friendly events around the book, which this year is Jarvis DeBerry's I Feel to Believe. And the book will be purchased and distributed through a very generous grant from the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. So thank you, LEH, for your support. Another group that is very dedicated to bringing readers together, like One Book, One New Orleans, is the Louisiana Book Festival. And like One Book, One New Orleans, since 2008, the Louisiana Book Festival has done One Book, One Festival. It's a reader discussion component as part of that experience. And I really look forward to hearing what that book will be, and then heading over to Baton Rouge on Saturday, October 29th, 2022, so that we can discuss it together. But in the meantime, if you're curious to learn more about the Louisiana Book Festival, you can head over to their YouTube channel and watch the virtual programming from 2021. Part of that virtual programming is what you're about to see here. It's called Two Writers, One House, and it features Jarvis DeBerry and our 2022 selection, I Feel to Believe. Jarvis is married to an incredibly talented poet, Kelly Harris-DeBerry, and the two of them are talking with Maurice Carlos Ruffin about what it is to have two writers living under one roof. So thank you so much to the Louisiana Book Festival for reaching out and offering to have us share this program with you today. And without further ado, here it is, Two Writers, One House.
On behalf of the Louisiana Center for the Book in the State Library of Louisiana, thank you for joining us for this virtual 2021 Louisiana Book Festival presentation. This program is Two Writers, One House, a conversation on writing with Jarvis DeBerry, Kelly Harris-DeBerry, and Maurice Carlos Ruffin. Veteran Louisiana journalist Jarvis DeBerry recently joined MSNBC.com as opinions editor. His previous roles include founding editor of the Louisiana Illuminator and deputy opinions editor, columnist, and editorial writer for the Times-Picayune. He was on the team of journalists awarded the Pulitzer Prize for public service for its coverage of Hurricane Katrina and the deadly flood that followed. His columns have won awards from the New Orleans Press Club, the Louisiana-Mississippi Associated Press, and the National Association of Black Journalists. Kelly Harris-DeBerry's debut collection, Freedom Knows My Name, has not only been celebrated for its poetry, but also for how it leverages technology. Harris has received fellowships from the Fine Arts Work Center and Cave Canem. She has worked as an editor, freelance writer, and most recently for Poets and Writers. Her work has recently been published in 64 Parishes, the International Journal on Hip Hop Studies, Torch Literary Magazine, Caduceus, Valley Voices, Southern Review, and more. Find her on the web at kellyhd.com. Maurice Carlos Ruffin is the author of The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You, a New York Times editor's choice. His first book, We Cast a Shadow, was a finalist for the PEN Faulkner Award. the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, and the PEN America Open Book Prize. Ruffin is the winner of several literary prizes, including the Iowa Review Award in Fiction. A New Orleans native, Ruffin is a professor of creative writing at Louisiana State University and the 2020-2021 John and Renee Grisham Writer-in-Residence at the University of Mississippi. Ladies and gentlemen, Jarvis DeBerry, Kelly Harris-DeBerry, and Maurice Carlos Ruffin.
Welcome. I am joined here by two of the best authors and poets that I know. We have today Kelly Harris-DeBerry, who is the poet and creator of Freedom Knows My Name, a book of poems, as well as somebody else who Kelly may know, Jarvis DeBerry, the creator of I Feel to Believe collected columns. And full disclosure, I have known these two people for quite a long time. So this is a bit of a homecoming for all of us. And it is a great pleasure for me to be on this side of the moderator's chair because I admire their work so much. I admire them as people in the personal capacity. So let's just start chatting, y'all. How you doing today? Kelly, we'll start with you and then Jarvis hop in.
Maurice, good to see you. It's good to thank you to the Louisiana Book Festival for inviting us and for all the work that the festival has done to amplify voices over the years. Thank you.
Jarvis?
Ditto. And it's good to see you, Maurice. You've been on quite the tear recently, so it's an honor to sit here and have this conversation with you.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, you two actually are spouses, and I think it's a wonderful thing because there is a long history of people who were married couple creating art, sometimes together, sometimes apart. But I just love the fact that your work is kind of so different, and yet I can see it speaking to each other. So I'm going to ask a series of questions about that. And I want to start with the hardest question first. I'm going to start with Jarvis. What is your favorite work of the poet Kelly Harris-DeBerry?
Repeat your sound 1 second. What is my favorite?
What's your favorite work of Kelly's?
Wow, that is really difficult for me to answer. I fell in love with her the first time I heard her read poetry, so I go way, way back with favorite works. But I'll limit it to this particular volume. I think two poems. I'm going to not answer your question specifically. Both the poem that she has about gentrification and the poem that she has about Serena Williams in this particular volume, because both of those poems, I think, really break out of the kind of rigid concept that people have of what a poem is. And in both of those cases, especially if you hear her perform those pieces and read those pieces, you'll see that she's also not bound up and tied up in this idea of what a poem is supposed to sound like and how a poet is supposed to read. Like, she puts her whole self into both of those poems. And it's so delightful just to see them on the page, but it just blows you away to hear her performing them. So I would say of this particular volume, those are by far my favorites.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's Serena Williams' poem. It definitely stuck with me. And performer is the right word to describe what Kelly does. I can see why you were quite smitten the first time you heard her perform. I think Kelly takes over a crowd. Doesn't matter who's in the crowd. You can't possibly ignore what she's doing. And quite often, Kelly will do poems in verse in a way that she will sing it for the audience. It's always very mesmerizing as well. But I'll ask Kelly. So people that don't know, Jarvis wrote many columns for the papers in New Orleans over the years. In some ways, feel like the voice of the city. I always felt I was in good hands reading Jarvis' work. There's so many things to choose from. But Kelly, do you have a favorite column that Jarvis has made that comes to mind?
I think kind of, and I think probably Jarvis, you should mute. We should mute when the other is talking for feedback. But like Jarvis said, he was already writing before we married, and so I think that I was already kind of just inspired by the fact that he was writing columns. And so I think New Orleans can be a tough place. And so first I admired his courage to write and to take stances that were not popular, that were controversial. So I think that I've learned from him to try to have courage as a writer. So I want to say that first. But I think one of my favorite columns was after, I think, Quavajene Wallace. No, that's not her last name. What's the movie where he's gonna tell me?
Beast of the Southern Wild, I think it is. I
Wow.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Onion did a piece where they had called the actress, young Black girl actress, a cunt and out of her name. And he wrote a piece responding to that through the lens of a father and thinking of our own daughter. And so that's one that I always remember. But to kind of throw something into the conversation, there have also been columns that I've disagreed with. And times that, behind the scenes that we have debated back and forth. And so one thing I think people may not understand about being married to another writer is that you always have a critic in the house. You always have someone that is holding you accountable, someone that really knows your writing habits, the things you always go to. He always will point out some things of how I start a line sometimes. You always start it that way. And I was like, no, I don't. And I was like, yes, you do. We go back and forth like that. And so, like, sometimes I can hear him in my head when I'm writing that, oh my God, if I show him this, he's going to say, that. And so, oftentimes I am trying to push him more creatively, whereas he's like my editor, and so we have this kind of, although we're both writers, we kind of write in two separate worlds, really, and it makes for most of the time, 90% of the time, good harmony in the house.
I have to say, it gives me pleasure to think of you all like discussing and even debating some of the pieces that Jarvis was putting together before they came out, because Jarvis has opinions. I mean, there's no doubt about that. You know which point he's coming from, but I do think that it's a sign of love and care when willing to share that opposing opinion with the person who's in the house who's also a writer. And I just think it's quite wonderful. I mean, I'm going to reread some of those essays with that in the back of my mind. And okay, Jarvis said this. What did Kelly think about this? Because we're on the same page. And just I'll point out that one of my favorites, and I had many favorites that you both made. I do know with Jarvis, he did a piece about the people that would sit on the neutral ground on Simon Boulevard. And I've lived like right there for 15 years plus at the time it came out. And I would see them out there, and I would kind of just look at them and not really think too much about it. And he really like made me recontextualize like the thoughts, what it means to have a community, and the assumptions that people might make, whether it relates to policing those people or to what the city's sort of policies are towards those people. It was just so insightful. And from that point forward, like I wasn't like neutral. I would kind of see the people and just like smile, like, yeah, hanging out, have a good time. It's a good conversation. So definitely that's a power of writing. So I do want to ask, you are two of the busiest people I know in writing. Like you're like this sort of literary power couple. You both have so many skills as a poet and as a writer as well. Multiple jobs. You have changed jobs a few times. You've always done well in the places that you've been in. Plus, you have a child, which is also additional work for both of you. Just for those of us in the audience, I know there's always somebody out who's wondering about it. How do you actually get writing done? You have that many responsibilities. You have to keep your head wrapped around at all times.
I will start and say that I just recently had a conversation with Kelly about the difficulties I have of both doing the professional writing, such as the columns you'll find in this book, and doing purely creative work. You should know something about that, Maurice, the balancing of, trying to be a professional and also carving off some space for creativity. But I will be the first to admit that Kelly has had a much bigger struggle in that. And because the columns that you see in my book are the result of me being at work, getting paid while I'm there to do this particular writing. The poems that you see in Kelly's volume come out of the moments that she's stolen and claimed for herself and cordoned off for herself. And it comes at the end of a long day or before anybody else wakes up. And I know she can elaborate on that, but I will acknowledge first and foremost that I got paid while writing the particular things that one will read in this particular volume, whereas Kelly didn't have that particular luxury. And I think most women writers don't have that luxury.
To that point, about motherhood and writing, I think it's very challenging. I think that it's not coincidence that often you will see women writers have one child. I know a lot of women writers who have one child, as my child is like now playing a game that I told her not to play while we're on the Zoom, right? But it is challenging, and I think even more so for Black women, because Black women are often chronic caretakers. And so as I am also writing my book, I'm also trying to encourage Jarvis to write his book. I'm also encouraging my daughter and helping her do homework. I'm like all over the place, right? And so this is both difficult and the norm for many women writers. And so I felt that at some point I had to surrender this book because I didn't know if I'd get another, not that I wouldn't get another opportunity. I was afraid that I would surrender regular life and job and motherhood to the dreams. And so therefore I had to really force myself and push myself and stay up late at night to try to get the book done.
Mm. Wow, that's so profound. And I'm certain that there are many people out there that can definitely understand what you mean by all of that from both your standpoints. Let's get straight to the books themselves. So for Kelly, as you were just saying, you had to surrender the book. Can you tell us a bit about the concept of what this book was meant to be, and about actually bringing it into the world?
Yeah. And I think oftentimes writers have in our minds what the writing should be. Can you all hear me okay?
I can hear you.
I think we have kind of this set idea of what a book should be. I'm going to write a book. But I think you have to also be open to where the book will go. And the manuscript that I submitted and what the book actually is are really two different things. And that was because I really felt that some of the manuscript that I submitted was becoming outdated, almost like when you buy a car and off the lot, it starts to depreciate. And so I was like worried about, and when this book is released, will it be timely? Will it stand? And so I went back, some poems I took out, some poems I put in, took some risk, got away a little bit from some of the form and the academic stuff, and just went for it with intuition. And so I'm glad that I did that. I'm sure that I caused many people headaches in all my changes, but I really feel like the book stands, and most importantly, I feel like it represents who I am. And it was important that more than sales or anything, that this was a book that people could say, yeah, that's Kelly. That's not her trying to write to trend. That's not her trying to write a formula to be on the New York Times bestseller. Like, this is a book where she stands in her integrity, and that was important to me.
Well, Kelly, you're one of the most
Elaborate that for a second. I mean, Kelly mentioned it, but I think it deserves a little more attention. That she worked on this book after the publisher said, we'll publish it. And just, it's almost like, you know, remember in 1997 when Tiger Woods won the Masters as like the youngest person ever. And then the first thing he did after that was like change the swing. And people were like, wait, you just won. Like, why are you changing? So she did that. And then the book is published. And then she decides, well, I think I need to do a second edition. So I'm gonna like rearrange and re-edit and resequence the poems that are already here. And it was always struck me as, wow, she is so serious about editing and revision that well after someone says, this is great, it's not sufficient. It wasn't sufficient for her. And she kept on and kept on and kept on. So she mentioned all the headaches she caused. At a certain point, I was like, okay, come on, Kelly, like let your book go. It's great, it's great. But I think readers will really be pleased at the result that she didn't let it go until she was personally satisfied with how it looked and how it sounded.
One more thing to that. At the time that I was kind of the second edition, there were a couple of things happening. At the same time where Kaisi Lehman was in process of redoing Heavy. And it really inspired me. Not that I'm Kaisi at all, but I so admired the fact that he wanted to do it again, that he wanted to, I can't speak for him, but the fact that he wanted to do it again even after success. The second edition is after all the first edition was sold, right? And so I could have just rode that wave. And certainly Kaisi could have done the same thing, but the combination of creative and business was really at the heart of that, of some of those changes. And so I have to really give a big shout out to Kaisi, because he really, from a distance, I was admiring and watching what he was doing with that. And so I was like, well, if he can do it, certainly maybe my little engine that could book could do the same thing. And so I say to writers that I think it's really important in that, you know, the person that you were when you submitted a manuscript is not often the person that you are. And like, you know, can your book age well? And so that was something that was really important to me also.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. And I guess moving to Jarvis's book, I Feel to Believe, you know, you had so many columns. I think it would have been impossible for you to put all the columns in the book, because then it would have been like, you know, 10 volumes worth of books. So what was the process of like winnowing down what you wound up putting into the book itself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I was in conversation with the University of New Orleans Press about this book, and this is not a knock at all, they didn't give me any direction. They didn't say how the book of columns should be this or that. They left it totally to my discretion and to my artistic vision. And the original manuscript that I sent them was probably about twice as long as the book that that exists right now. And I went back through it, and I decided that I wanted the book to tell the story, or tell a story, I should say, about New Orleans over a particular stretch of time for about 2 decades. So there were some favorites, some things that I really, really liked and I thought were really, really good examples of my work that I decided to remove because I did not think that they necessarily fit in with the overall theme of New Orleans during this particular stretch of time. And then some of them were repetitive. For example, I think I have one or two columns in the book about the Danziger Bridge tragedy where the Madisons, Ronald Madison was killed and J.J. Brissett were killed, and there were so many others who were injured. I can't tell you off the top of my head how many times I wrote about Danziger, but I didn't want to have, excuse me, to have every column that I wrote about Danziger in this particular book. I wanted one that was representative some way of them all. And I wanted it to be more than bad stuff. I wanted it to be more than misery. I didn't want it to be uniformly serious. I wanted it to convey what life living in New Orleans is like. There are a lot of murders, there's a lot of crime, but sometimes you're standing in line at the grocery store and you find yourself in the craziest conversations. Or, sometimes there's a situation where someone in your neighborhood dies and there's a mournful cortege of trumpeters and neighbors walking down the street to pay homage to the person in the neighborhood who just passed away. And so there are all these different aspects of New Orleans that I think resist this kind of one-dimensional caricature that outsiders have of it. And I just wanted it to be really a love song to New Orleans, because everybody knows, anybody who knows me knows that I am from Mississippi and that I spent, my childhood in Mississippi, but at the same time, I feel like New Orleans is the place where I grew up. And I wanted to pay homage to this place that raised me in so many ways. And to Kelly's point about, does it still stand up at the test of the time? One of the biggest debates I had was, do I include any columns in this volume that I would not write at this particular time? And I erred on the side of just taking out the columns that make me cringe a little bit or that I would take issue with, because I didn't know how to say, hey, this is an example of me then, not necessarily how I think now. So I was very conscious of this is being published in 2020, not in the 1990s, not in the early 2000s. And to Kelly's point, I wanted something that would stand up. And something I would be proud of, and columns I can defend. I will put it that way going forward.
That's interesting that you talk about the sort of change over time, because I think it's a sign of an honest intellect when you can recognize that you have changed and you can make decisions about what's included, what's excluded. That really makes a lot of sense to me. And I wasn't sure if I was going to ask this, but if either one of you are interested in reading a short passage or anything from your work, feel free. But before we do that, in a couple of minutes, I was really curious about the book's physical design. A lot of times when book covers are being designed, there's certain genre limitations. Certain books get certain kinds of covers, and then there's the question of whether or not the author had anything to say about the covers. So when I look at your covers, now I want to start with Kelly. I just want to just get some backstory on how your cover came to be and what do you think about it?
I don't know if everybody can see it, but there are faces inside of these flowers. And I see people as kind of seeds and blooming. And there's also a watermark of a slave ship on this cover as well, almost as if I am planting the people are flowers upon the slave ship. And I wanted it to function as a kind of libation, if you will, to freedom. Just freedom knows my name. And to talk a little bit about the title for 1 second, it was important to me. People know my husband's name. They know other people's names, but freedom is so important to me, and it hasn't forgotten me. It hasn't forgotten me through all the things that I have endured, or sometimes I think artists can feel invisible or not appreciated. And so this is also a reminder to myself that freedom knows my name. The book is sectioned off, and there's 4 sections. Some of the layouts were really tricky. Each section begins with a quote from a Black woman writer that I admire. Probably with the exception of Shirley Chisholm, who is, well, she has a biography, but we don't really know her as a literary figure. But to like Jarvis's point, the gentrification poem, excuse me, is structured like a neighborhood. And so I was like wondering, can I actually make the poem do what I'm saying? So there was that. And then he mentioned the Serena poem, and let's see if I can find it in here. But she's racing race. And in the book, she's racing. The poem is actually, it's in a racetrack format, and you can read it both ways. So I'm trying to do some creative things with this book. I'm also trying to leverage technology. There's a QR code on the book. You can scan that code and it will take you to my voice. And you can hear me read some of the poems in the book, which at the time, this is just something I wanted to do to like push the envelope for creativity and technology. But what wound up happening was the pandemic hit. And so it allowed for readers to have another ramp to my work. And so although I couldn't travel and I couldn't tour and so many things were canceled, they were still able to listen and hear my voice. In fact, I had one guy say he was listening to my work while he was cutting the grass. I don't know how you could hear me over the lawnmower, but he really, talked about, listening to this book while he was moving and movement, just taking care of his daughters. And so I feel really honored and privileged that people may have the book on the shelf, but that the poems are like traveling with them in their everyday life. So I hope that answers your question. I wanted to go back to like one little thing though about being married to a writer and a column that Jarvis had to just show you like how time spans. Jarvis wrote this column about Fantasia when she had the song about baby mamas. But he was not married to me then. And I don't believe that poem, that column would have flown had he been married to me. Like I think being, having the voice and the conscience of a Black woman in the house, he can maybe talk to that, how his column shifted after marriage, because, now he's got, this wife, at home that's like, wait a minute, what about that, bruh? That kind of thing. So yeah, I wanted to drop that into the conversation as well.
I don't know what would have transpired, but I do think that she would have warned me of the wrath of Black women that was going to result of me writing that column, because my phone rang off the hook all day long from self-identified baby mamas who were telling me about myself. And I was like, wow, I really, really stepped into it. So yeah, if nothing else, she would have said, you're going to really, really, really get in trouble over this one. But yeah.
Wow. Well, I love these little inside stories that I never thought about, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Jarvis, what about your cover? What do you want to say about that? Or your book structure?
The structure of the book or the structure of the columns?
Yes.
I decided, we thought about all these different ways we could have done it and structured the book, and just ended up going chronologically because, as I said, I settled on the theme of telling the story of New Orleans over specific 20-year period, the roughly 20 years that I was writing columns for the Times-Picayune. We went back and forth about different ways that we could have curated this, but decided that the simplest approach was probably the best approach. And so really just, I mean, I did not want to tinker with or alter things that had already been published. I mean, if things were misspelled and there were typos, we tried to address that. But I really wanted to present the columns the way that they were presented when originally published. And yeah, just try to give this real snapshot of what New Orleans was during this particular time. So I don't have any, concrete columns the way that Kelly has concrete poems in this volume. But I do think that seeing all the work together does something for the reader that reading a column over a span of years, every 3 or 4 or 5 days, does not. I think this is like Jarvis distilled in a way that, a series of columns don't do.
I was going to add one thing to your question, Maurice, about covers. So anybody that knows Jarvis knows that he is not like a brand guy. Like he'd rather hide behind the column and not like put his face out there. So the decision to put his picture and put him on the cover of a book was like, I believe was a little uncomfortable for him because he's not a guy that wants his face out there. I shouldn't say that he doesn't want his face out there. You can probably speak more to it, but that kind of pushing not only the work, but him out there was a little, I remember him being a little uncomfortable with that. Maybe he should take on, Jarvis, maybe you should do like Maurice and just keep morphing your face and you'll be more comfortable.
Yo, not to get too far off track, but that's one of the reasons why I did it. I was just tired of seeing my face. So I was like, you know what, let's use somebody else's faces or whatever. Yeah, that works on my Twitter. Well, look, I do want to, I just know that personally, I've always enjoyed like reading your work and hearing you perform your work. So if either one of you want to do something, or both of you, just let's hear it now.
I'll defer to, no, let me not follow Kelly. I have better sense.
Smart. Nobody can follow Kelly.
So Kelly talks about me being controversial. One of the things that a reader in 2021 would not necessarily know was controversial was the debate over whether New Orleans should have Mardi Gras in 2006. And actually that debate cost me a relationship with somebody I kind of considered a friend of sorts. We were kind of professional colleagues more than anything. And it was a real divide, I think, between New Orleanians who were in New Orleans, as I was, and New Orleanians who had grown up in New Orleans and had been displaced. And the person whose friendship ended with me was one who had been in New Orleans and was out of New Orleans and felt that I was too dismissive, I think, to the complaints that New Orleans ought not have a Mardi Gras in 2006. And the column that really, I guess, messed everything up was when I argued, look, if y'all are in Atlanta, if y'all are in Houston, if you're in Memphis, if you're in Chicago, if you're in St. Louis, things work where you are. You have lights, you're driving and you don't have your tires punctured every 3 blocks. The grocery stores are open, restaurants are open. You're not living among filth. You're not living wondering if the house down the street has a dead body in it. We are here, we are miserable. And can we have a little joy? Please, can we have something that makes us smile? So anyway, after I kind of had that bit of a falling out, this was a column that resulted, and it was published December 6, 2005. Triumph over sorrow is our MO. And it begins with a really well-known quote from the poet Lucille Clifton: "Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed." Lucille Clifton. We are alive. Ask us how our thoughts could turn to celebration after we've suffered so much, how we could think about Mardi Gras even as we continue to suffer. And that's the only answer we can provide. We are alive. Yes, we've lost things. We've lost homes, big ones, little ones, shotguns, camelbacks, cottages, mansions. We've lost neighborhoods, rich ones, poor ones, mixed ones, loud ones, quiet ones. We've lost schools and congregations. We've lost jobs. We've lost our sense of community, our sense of security. And some of us may feel that we've lost or are losing whatever grip we had on our sanity. We've lost people, not just random people either, but loved ones, mamas and daddies, marans and parans, our neighbors, our classmates, grandparents, so many grandparents. You ask, who in their right minds would think of this as a time to plan a celebration? We would. We who had death lapping at our ankles. We who had to crane our necks for the next breath. We who hacked our way out of our attics. We who returned to homes that were moldy and muddy, homes that had fallen down, homes that had been washed off their foundations and moved on down the street. It might not make sense to you. Perhaps you hear our plans and ask, how could you? Try to understand. This is what we do. This is who we are. Defiance defines us. And at this time, and in this place, nothing needs to be more assiduously defied than death itself.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jarvis. And again, smart move to not follow Kelly, who's now going to give us a little bit of heat, I guess. I'm making assumptions.
Oh man, that's hard to follow. And I'm torn between reading a poem about New Orleans and reading, I've often been asked, what are some of the similarities in New Orleans Hurricane Katrina loss and pandemic? And, you know, when just New Orleans was losing things and in struggle, people kind of looked at us from a distance. But the world is such now that everybody is losing something. And I think that there seems to be a sympathy and empathy for us in ways that perhaps weren't before, because people now can see what we were saying at times, you know, things that we lost that people lost that may have seemed trivial to others, people now understand more clearly. So I think that I will try to take us in that direction with the last poem in my book called "What Songs Shall We Sing Now?" And this chapter begins with a quote from Gwendolyn Brooks, which says, "We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond." What songs shall we sing now? Now that now is all we have. We know the hum of sparrows in hushed harbors. This life has no shorthand. I write these poems knowing each word is not enough flowers for the dead. or the living. I pull memories like apples from trees, taste the sweetness of yesterday, chew wisdom from elders kissing my cheek. I see children in front yards, smell Sunday dinners, echoes of tambourines still fill this temple. The glory of our everydayness suddenly turned cold. What songs shall we sing now? Sorrow pins itself to us like a corsage. We dance with memories and tender hope while the world is swollen with rage. What is the temperature on your tongue? What new versions of ourselves must we make to survive? What song shall we sing now over the dead and the days we can't breathe back? Can you preach yourself out of the blues? Can you preach yourself out of the blues without a church? We, weary people, been waiting water and worry for lifetimes. This is not a depression poem. Pray for me. This is not a depression poem. This is a psalm for Zion, for suffering, for people I could only touch in a square of newspaper, for the distance between my mama and me, and for the dead that died with funerals on phones, students dying for hugs and recess, the poor with less and less and less. Who's zooming whom, who's driving by, waving through windows? I want to read your lips and know you're okay. This is for the sudden shock of you got it. And for the people who say, I'm not religious, but pray for me. This is a scream to our government rolling over flesh and land. This is a warm prayer with no answers. What songs shall we sing now? I reach past the tears in my throat, searching for a song in this valley. Must be a sermon somewhere, must be a sermon somewhere in a newborn. Must be joy coming in the morning. Even when we are mourning, we are alive. Even when we are mourning, we are alive. And that is the bread given to us this day. Oh Lord, give us this day.
You can't say amen, say woo. That was incredible. Thank you so much for that, Kelly and Jarvis. These things always go so fast, but I do have a couple of questions I want to ask you to wrap up for today. My brain's like muddled because of the beauty and the intelligence that comes through in both of your work. I can only imagine what kind of work your daughter may create one day if she becomes a poet or a writer or a journalist, something like that. But I do want to ask about, so I always think about this with both of you. I never actually asked this question directly. There's so much in everything that you write. When I look at Jarvis, I think about just like the idea of Jarvis being like this person who was always producing these talents with such proficiency that was, again, being a voice for the city, with Kelly making this work that feels like simultaneously classic, but also in the moment. Who are your influences? Like, who do you think about as your literary like mentors? Maybe like your posse or like your peers? Who do you look to when you're creating your work?
Well, I want to bring your attention to one of our many bookshelves in our home. And I don't know if people can just see, it goes like 6 shelves up and they're very wide. And so you see, we have, there's Amiri Baraka here, there is Walt Whitman, there's Zora Neale Hurston, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, there's Hemingway, there's all sorts of things on our bookshelf, and that's just one. We always are fighting and saying, and it's what I'm saying, we don't have any more room for books. And Jarvis was like, how can you say that? Like, we're writers. It's like, you know, our collection is it's a lot. But so all of our influences are always around us. And I mentioned some of those, well, Gwendolyn Brooks, Zora Neale Hurston, and also the people of New Orleans for me. There's a music inside of the conversation. There is a playfulness that I feel gives me permission to do the same in my work. And so the people for me, and of course, writers that I've read in graduate school, and tons of folks behind me. Langston Hughes is behind me. Richard Wright, Kalamu. We have to say his name, Kalamu Yasalam, and Dr. Ward. So many great writers in New Orleans as well.
I was going to mention Kalamu, obviously, because when I was at No More Literary Society, starting in 1999, it was around that same time that I really started to write columns regularly. And the rigor of that writing workshop cannot be, it is completely intrinsic, really, to what you see in this particular volume. But as for inspiration, I have not taken as much inspiration from other writers as I have from just people who I consider to be brave in general. Because column writing, as much as it is about the writing itself, it is first and foremost about bravery and being able to speak what you want to say. And I can't say that I've ever been as brave as I aspire to be. But when I have a conversation with Jerome Smith or even Kalamu himself or other relatives who put themselves and their bodies at risk for a cause or for something they believed in. Add to all of that the fact that I'm born in Holly Springs, Mississippi, which is the birthplace of Ida B. Wells, who was writing stuff that was far more daring than anything that I've ever written in the early 20th century, in the late 19th century, calling out white people who were lynchers, caused her newspaper to be burned to the ground in Memphis, Tennessee. And so what I'm constantly trying to do is associate myself with other brave people, and hopefully like some process of mitosis will come over and I will have like some semblance of the bravery that they do. But really the inspiration has been from writers for sure, but really I just want to be as brave as the people who I have thought have really put it all on the line. And I tell myself, I'm not putting at risk as much as they did. So it's gonna be okay. Like I'm gonna survive because they survived. And just using that in those moments when I am most afraid of what might come when this is published.
Mm. That's wonderful, because I mean, you must know this already, but I'll just say it out loud. You're both an inspiration to so many people in New Orleans, whether they are writers or non-writers. In my work, I know that there's a lot of things that I've done that wouldn't exist if I hadn't, known you personally, but also read your work specifically. So to that point, my last question is, I'm kind of being selfish here. What are y'all working on? What's next? What are you aiming to do with your literary futures?
Kelly?
You can go ahead.
I really I've been talking in the last weeks really about focusing more on personal writing and personal essays, which is something I did more often when I didn't have the column. And so I am trying to like calibrate my creativity and like save something for something that's not for kind of a media organization. But I've been through a lot personally. Kelly and I have, and me in particular, with kidney disease, with my mother dying of breast cancer about more than a decade ago. There's so many things that are like really like wanting to get out and wanting to be written. that at this moment, I think it would be good for me to heed that. And it doesn't matter to me necessarily if anybody publishes it, or at least not at this moment. What's really important is for me to kind of explore and kind of plumb the depths of those sorrows, those crises, and to put it on the page. And I'm committing myself to doing that.
Thank you.
I want to take some time to read more and like get back to enjoying reading for pleasure. And so I'm doing some of that. I want to write more about music. Most people that know me know I'm a big music fan, and I really want to explore music and race and politics. I just finished a piece for 64 parishes on the popularity of the song Casanova in New Orleans and tracing it from the north to the south. And that's been really interesting, all the responses to that. And so that was fun. I'm never going to abandon poetry for sure. And so I will continue to write poems. And I have been writing some new things and really going in the direction of probably looking at race, but also looking at just the world and really thinking of myself as not just living in a city, but like living on earth. Like, what does it mean to just live on earth, you know? And so those are some of the things that I'm working on. And I'm just working on trying to be in this time of pandemic and uncertainty, and just working on trying to maintain and love and not get seduced by all the things around us that can make us monsters also. And so a friend of mine was saying, I just want everybody to win. And I said, yes, I want everybody to win, but I want everybody to win without compromise. Right. And so, like, how do we do that? And so that's where I am. And so we're around and, doing the best that we can, like everyone else.
I certainly take that point, and I know that you both do a wonderful job caring for each other because the community has witnessed that. So I want to say on behalf of the book festival, I want to thank both you, Kelly, and you, Jarvis, for just being such wonderful people and creators. We're always rooting for you. We want to see you win. You know that you're going to win without compromise. So on that note, I'm Maurice Carlos Ruffin, and that's our panel. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, Maurice.
Thank you for watching this presentation of the virtual 2021 Louisiana Book Festival. Please visit our official bookseller, Cavalier House Books, and receive 20% off all featured festival titles through the end of the year. A special thank you to our festival sponsors. The Louisiana Book Festival will return on October 29th, 2022.
Thank you so much, Jarvis, Kelly, and Maurice, for that amazing panel. And I was so excited when Jarvis and Kelly both named Kalamu Ya Salam as one of their literary influences, because that's the perfect way to get you excited about the next thing we have coming up. On January 26th at 6:30 p.m., One Book One New Orleans is bringing you the kickoff of our 2022 programming focused on I Feel to Believe by Jarvis DeBerry. Jarvis will be joined by Kalamu Ya Salam and Ayo Fayemi Robinson for a journey beyond imagination when they talk about coming up in New Orleans as Black writers and editing in the city and looking at the city that we all love in an unflinching way in their writing. So please plan on joining us next Wednesday when we explore these topics and more right here on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you so much. We'll see you then.